When we think about our stories, we're all probably tempted to think they're a bit meaningless. I mean, think about it. For some of us, it's, you know, commute an hour to work and then work an 8 to 5 job, helping widgets get produced, or whatever you do in your life. Might be in a factory floor, might be in a cubicle, but you think, man, is there any significance to this? And you go home on your hour commute and you do things around the house, or you have activities with kids, and before you know it, the evening's done, you go to bed, you do it all over again, and you do that for like 30 or 40 years, and you retire for a few years, and then you die, and everybody just goes back to the church and eats Jello and potato salad, at the meal, and you're like, man, is this it? Is this life? You know, your life is not meaningless. You see, when Jesus' story becomes your story, that's when the adventure begins. You're going to take a look tonight at a couple scriptures from the life of an apostle named Peter. Peter was a fisherman. Fun job, I'm sure. He owned his own business. It was a little small business he and his brother owned, and I'm sure he had a good life. But his life went into a whole new gear when Jesus said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." Peter's life completely changed in that moment. What I love about the calling of a guy like Peter is Jesus didn't join Peter's story. Jesus invited Peter to join his story. I think it's very important because I think in our world right now, particularly our religious context of America, um, Jesus can often be seen and unfortunately often be preached as a life enhancer, like your best life now. Just ask Jesus into your life and ask him to join your life. No, that's not the call of Jesus. The call of Jesus is Jesus looks at you and I and says, follow me, join my story, become part of my story. Like, it's not about Jesus joining our story, it's us joining his. Now think about the adventures that Peter went on right after this. I wrote some of them down. Listen to this. Jesus drives out a demon during church. That's like the next day after Peter starts following Jesus. Many people are healed that same day. That same day, Peter sees his mother-in-law healed. The next day, he sees a man with leprosy healed. He sees, over the next few days and weeks, he sees a paralyzed man walk. He sees Jesus welcoming sinners that everybody else rejected. Jesus welcomes them in, and he sees these folks get transformed. He sees Jesus confront the religious establishment. And that's just like the first 2 chapters after Peter starts following Jesus and joins Jesus' story. I mean, Peter, man, what else does he experience? He experiences walking on water. He sees people raised from the dead. He joins Jesus on a mountaintop and sees Jesus glorified. He shines like lightning, it says. And Moses and Elijah, who'd been dead for very, very long time, for many centuries, they are resurrected in that moment and they get to hang out with Jesus. And Peter gets to see all this. It's an amazing life he leads. Of course, he denies Jesus 3 times. But even after that, Peter has a story about just a few days later walking the beachside with Jesus and Jesus reinstating him 3 different times. Do you love me, Peter? Yes, I do, Lord. Feed my sheep. It's like Jesus is saying, even though you failed, I'm still calling you. And the call on your life still remains. I mean, Peter experienced some cool stuff. He preaches the first ever gospel story. And lots of people come to know Jesus when he does that in Acts 2. Peter preaches one of the first gospel messages to non-Jews in Acts 10 and 11. And he sees Gentiles come to know Jesus, which was unheard of back then. You know, maybe, thinking of Peter and those kind of stories are over the top. But I know some people whose everyday life may sound pretty mundane, and yet since they've joined Jesus' story, they've been on an adventure. I think of a guy like Mickey Reed, who, I don't know, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago on Christmas Eve. Mickey didn't even want to be here. He came because his mom wanted to go to a Christmas Eve service, and he said, I've met some Vineyard folks from where I work. Let's go there. And so he comes, And he's actually a little like perturbed at the call at the end where I was inviting people to follow Jesus. And he said, I can't believe these people, raising their hand and saying they want to follow Jesus. He says, the next thing I know, my hand's in the air and I'm accepting Jesus. Which just a few months after that spring, Mickey went to Haiti on his first mission trip. And he's been there like 3 times, I think, since then. I mean, he went from not even saved to joining Jesus' story and then going on an adventure to Haiti. Since then, he's seen his wife grow in Christ, his kids grow in Christ. He's even got to take one of his daughters to Haiti with him this past spring. Work has been transformed. He witnesses to his coworkers and the people he serves, and he's on a new adventure right now. He's leading one of the groups that are watching this video. And so Mickey's life, well, he's just a guy going to work, raising a family, these everyday things we all do. It's turned into an adventure because he joined Jesus' story. Recently, I've talked to several different nurses who work everything from like children's ICU units to cancer wards to just the floors taking care of various kinds of people that are injured or sick. And it's been fun listening to their stories because they see the profession obviously as helping people, so it has some significance built in, but they see it as they get to bring the encouragement of God to some people who are in some pretty dark places. And so they bring a verse or an encouraging word, or they pray over people. Sometimes they ask permission and they pray for them. Sometimes as they're working, they're saying prayers quietly. They're bringing Jesus' presence to bear in a place that can be quite discouraging and dark at times when people are ill or facing horrible diagnosis. So these ladies, nurse friends of mine, they have taken their regular job and they've made it even more significant. They've made it an adventure every day to see what God's going to do simply by bringing Jesus to bear there. They've joined Jesus' story, and Jesus is doing stuff in the hospitals they work at, and so they've joined him and they're doing it. I think of Mike Palmer, who a few years ago at one of our conferences heard about power evangelism and asking for eyes to see what Jesus is doing in the moment of life, and then praying for them. And so, you know, Mike is a state worker, west of downtown Columbus, just a regular routine job. And yet he's turned it into an adventure because he joined Jesus' story. He goes 20 minutes early to the truck stop to where he and his coworkers who carpool together meet. And he goes 20 minutes early just so that he can see if Jesus is doing something there with somebody that's working or somebody that's stopping at a truck stop, and he prays for them. He prays for his coworkers. He sees Jesus regularly encourage people. He's seen a few people healed as he prays for them. And this is an adventure. And it's an adventure, not because his job is probably the most exciting job in the world. It's exciting and it's an adventure because Mike decided to let his story join Jesus's story. He told a story recently of praying for a coworker and saw their back pain go from 10 to 1. And later on, he ran into that person and they said, "Do you go to the vineyard?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I do. That's kind of odd. We're in Columbus. Why would you ask?" I said, "Well, I have a friend that goes to a vineyard in the Columbus area, and they told me they teach people to wait on the Spirit and heal the sick like you do. Isn't that cool? Even donut stops on the way to church become an adventure because it's just a time to see, is Jesus praying with the clerk? If he is, then I'm going to pray for the clerk. That's what happens when you allow your story to join Jesus' story. Tonight's study is about Peter. Pay attention to how Peter joined Jesus' story. Like Peter, you have witnessed Jesus' work in your life. So think about that. How have you witnessed Jesus' work in your life? What do you think Jesus would have you do now since you've joined his story? What adventure is Jesus calling you on? When Jesus rewrites your story, the adventure begins. And it really begins when his story becomes your story.